Before we get into this episode, a quick thank you to the brands that make Master Integrator possible. This episode is brought to you by ADI Global, formerly Snap One, your one-stop partner for professional integration. ADI brings together powerhouse brands like Control4, Arachnus, Binary and Strong, along with a carefully curated range of distributed products all under one roof. More than that, they back it up with real integrator-first support, from system design to installation and well beyond handover. They're focused on helping you deliver smarter, more reliable projects, because when you win, they win. If you want to learn more, give the team a call on 1-800-990-548. We're also supported today by Sonance, the benchmark in architectural audio. If you're working in spaces where design matters just as much as performance, Sonance makes it possible to deliver incredible sound without compromising the aesthetic. From discrete, small aperture speakers that disappear into timber ceilings to completely invisible solutions, they give you the tools to satisfy both the client and the designer. Sonance is available exclusively in Australia through Amber Technology. Now, if you're looking for serious design firepower behind your next project, let me introduce you to Colosseum. Colosseum is a white label design and documentation partner built specifically for integrators, specializing in cinema and media room design, lighting control, and automation engineering. And their new Spark program is a big deal. If your vendor is Spark enabled, you can unlock Colosseum designed cinemas at nearly half the usual cost. Lower upfront investment, immersive 3D walkthroughs, faster sales conversations. Colosseum really is the design and documentation wingman you didn't know you needed. And finally, a quick personal ask. I'm currently working with a research team at the University of the Sunshine Coast, looking at how smart home technology can better support people with disabilities. But for this to be meaningful, they need to hear from the integrators actually delivering these systems in the real world. If you've got a bit of time for a conversation, your insight could genuinely shape the outcome. The link to get involved is in the show notes. I'd really appreciate you checking it out. Now, on with the show. Hello and welcome to Master Integrator, the podcast that focuses on what it really takes to run a sustainable systems integration business. I'm your host, Paul Skelton. Before we get into today's conversation, a quick thank you to the partners who support the podcast and the wider integration industry. ADI Global, formerly Snap One, Amber Technology, Colosseum, Connected Magazine, and CEDIA. Now, I want to start today's episode with a situation I've seen play out far too often. An integrator tells me they're flat out. The pipeline looks strong, projects are stacked back to back. But when you scratch the surface, it's a different story. Cash flow's tight. The owner hasn't taken a proper wage. They're one bad job away from real trouble. That gap between busy and profitable is exactly what today's conversation is about. My guest is Leslie Shiner, a financial management consultant who has worked with the CEDIA channel for more than 2 decades. Leslie has seen hundreds of integration businesses from the inside, and what she brings isn't theory, it's pattern recognition. We talk about profit, cash flow, estimating, and the uncomfortable truths that determine whether a business survives long-term or quietly burns out. This is Master Integrator. Here's Leslie Shiner. Welcome to the show. For the people who are listening to this who might not have met you before or be familiar with your work, can you just give us a little bit of a background of who you are and how you got to where you are today in this industry?
My name's Leslie Shiner, and I'm a consultant. I do financial management consulting. I've been working with CEDIA and the CEDIA channel, let's just say over 20 years. I sort of stopped counting after 20. And my focus is to help small businesses understand that numbers can be their friend and that they can make good management decisions by looking at some numbers. And the goal is ultimately to improve profitability, which is my goal for all of my clients, is to figure out what's working, what's not working, where am I making money, where am I losing money, how can I stop the stuff that doesn't work, and how can I do more and know what does work. So
like you, this year is my 20th anniversary. Obviously, you're 20 and, but I'll ask you the same question that I get asked a fair bit is what makes you keep coming back to this industry? I mean, you've worked with companies all around the world. What is it about this industry that actually makes you say, I'm happy to be here?
That's a great question. It's funny because everybody's like, when are you going to retire? I can't because I have too much fun. I particularly like there's an openness and an understanding that more work is needed. So for businesses, they're like, I'm this close to really taking off, or I'm this close to being profitable, or I'm this close to really matching and meeting all my goals. So what's stopping me? And so just the excitement of talking to people that say, oh my gosh, I read your book or I went to one of your classes and it changed my life. And it's that sort of stuff that just keeps me coming. If people looked at me and said, oh, not you again, yeah, I probably wouldn't do it. But everybody that I talk to, and I have people that come up to me like at an expo or that have said, oh, I took your class like 15 years ago and we changed the way we did our business. And that's the kind of stuff that just keeps me going.
So let's talk a little bit about the issues that integration businesses are facing at the moment, because this is very much kind of your area of expertise. What are the biggest challenges that integrators are facing today, and are they universal challenges?
So that's great. I taught a class at ISE in Barcelona about managing subcontractors in sort of today's gig economy. I think one of the biggest challenges is finding labor, and that is global, is finding somebody. Do I have to start from scratch and train them? Can I find somebody who's good? What if they're going to leave and start my company or start a company and compete against me? So I think one of the biggest challenges is having a good labor force. But at the same time, I think that a lot of integrators are not aware of where they could be making more money. So, for example, I always say there's 3 ways to improve profits. You can charge more, spend less, or do more work. And a lot of people think that the only way to be more profitable is to do more work. And I think that's the least way to be more profitable. I see way too many people thinking that they're not doing enough, so they have to sell more, and then they lower the prices, and they don't make any profit. So my point is that a lot of integrators think the only way to make more money is to sell more. And I'm saying that's probably the least profitable way to make more money. I think it's more important to take a look at what are you doing? How much are you charging enough? Are you not charging enough? How busy are you? So my first question I always ask is, how busy are you? And a lot of people will say, oh, yeah, well, we're pretty busy. I said, then you're not charging enough. So I actually put together for this presentation a spreadsheet that shows somebody who increases their prices 10% and their volume drops. They lose a bunch of clients, which everybody says, oh, I can't raise my rates. I'll lose all my clients. They raise their rates, they lose their clients, their volume drops, and they double their profit. How would you like to work less and earn more? And it's just not something that integrators think about. So if their biggest challenge is they're really busy, one of the ways to fix it is to increase the rates, see who drops off, keep the clients that pay more, and they'll actually make more money. And I think that's the best way to do it. And too many integrators don't think about that as a solution, because as soon as I say raise your rates, they're like, I'll lose all my clients. I'm like, you won't. And if you do, then cut them back down.
So how do you actually change that mindset then of, I guess, the fear to pull that trigger and actually increase your rates? How do you get around that and say this is the right thing to do? Because I think everyone wants to operate in a world where things are certain, which it's not really possible. But how do you encourage them to take that step?
Right. So certainly your rates should be set not necessarily standard for the company, but by the size of the job. You can certainly have less markup on a larger job, but the first thing you do is if you do service work or if you do small jobs, raise your rates and see what happens. It's not set in stone. If you raise your rates and you don't have any work, then you raised them too much. But And I say this only if you are busy, if you are at capacity or close to capacity. If you're struggling to fill the day, then that's a different conversation. But for most integrators I talk to, I'm like, "Are you guys busy?" And they're like, "Yeah." And that's the first sign that you should be raising your rates.
So I guess the other thing that I've noticed out there is this idea that profit is a dirty word. People don't like to talk about profit. People don't like to talk about how much money they make, or they almost seem embarrassed by making money. Why is it such an awkward topic for integrators? And I guess how do we remove that stigma? Because obviously we're in business to run a business.
Right, right. Well, and that's why I think a lot of times when you're putting together a proposal that you show all the costs and then you add something called overhead and something called profit, a lot of people are like, "Why should I pay your profit? Why should I even pay your overhead?" So I think instead of using the term profit in a proposal, it's a management fee, it's an expertise fee, it's a fee to coordinate and put everything together. If you've got subs, you have relationships with vendors, you have relationships with suppliers, and they're not actually just paying profit for you to go off to Aruba. They're actually paying for what you can do. Otherwise, go do it yourself. Go out and buy the stuff from Amazon and try and install it yourself. We've seen people do that, but we put together the term integration. We integrate it all. And so I think it's a really good point. A lot of people don't like the term profit. So that's where I put in the management fee or put in something else because it's funny because I go back and I blame, and I don't know if you've had this in Australia. In the United States, we had a TV show called, I can't remember what this TV, Extreme Home Makeover.
Mm-hmm.
Did you have anything like that?
Yep, certainly did.
Which basically taught the watching population that all the remodels could be done for free and in a week. And that's a great expectation. Boy, do I do my project, do it in a week and then don't charge anything. I had several clients of mine that actually worked on those projects. The horror stories they told me and the messes that were made to cover up, and then they had to go back and clean everything up and redo it because you can't do it in a week. So I think that sort of ruined the idea. If you hire somebody to do something, you have to pay them to do something. So if they're hiring you to integrate a project, then they have to pay you to integrate the project, not just reimburse you for everything you spent on the equipment or everything you spend to pay your employees. They're paying you for work, services rendered.
Probably in the last, say, 18 months to 2 years over here at least, there's been some pretty high-profile collapses. Some big integration companies that, from an outward perception, they looked like they would be profitable. I actually imagine that if you asked the owners, they would have said they were profitable. So I'm wondering from your perspective then, having been involved with the business side of what are some of those reasons that you're seeing that people believe they're profitable and really they're not? I mean, how are they conflating that into thinking they're successful and maybe they might be struggling?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. There's a couple of reasons. First of all, if they don't set it up in the way that is correct, if they call customer deposits income, they're going to look really profitable. So give me $10,000. I just made $10,000. Yay. Did I make $10,000? No, I actually have what's called a liability. I owe either you a refund of $10,000 or $10,000 worth of equipment. So if companies do not account for customer deposits correctly, and if they just call all the money coming in as income, they will look very profitable, especially in terms of growth. So if I do more work tomorrow than I did today, I'm getting bigger and bigger customer deposits. Woohoo! I'm just raking in the dough. The only problem with that is I actually have to do the work. And so what ends up happening is now if I'm spending the money, buy the equipment, pay the labor, and do the work, and if I don't have any more work coming in, where's the money for that? I took it and I went to Aruba. I don't know why I have Aruba on the brain. So yes, I think the number one reasons that that companies fail is they don't understand what customer deposits are, and they call that income. But the second reason they fail is they go back to what I talked about earlier, where they think the only way to make more money is to do more work. Okay, fine. They sell a bunch of projects and they lose their shirt. Because what ends up happening is if I can do this much work, if I double that work, I can't do it. I'm running around like a chicken with my head cut off. I'm not paying attention to things I'm paying attention to. And all of a sudden, jobs are falling apart. So if they don't have the infrastructure for the volume that they're running, they are going to get in trouble. And the third reason that they end up going out of business is that the margins on the good jobs are still quite small, and they don't cover the one bad job. I always say, I know integrators, and find me an integrator that's never had a stinker job, and I'll give you $100,000. That every so often you're going to have a bad job. Something's going to go wrong. The client's going to be awful, whatever. And I actually do the math. I did the math on one of the presentations I gave, where I can show that the one bad job can actually wipe out the profits of 5 good jobs and basically make you worse than where you are to begin with. And you probably, if you just put the money in the bank and not done any work, you'd have more money. So I don't think they think about enough margins. They think, oh, look, I made this much money on this project, but they're not thinking that some of that has to go into a bank to cover the potential and the the potential that it will happen, that you have a bad job that will take away those profits.
There's actually so many subjects here I want to cover off because business itself is a broad subject. But let's go to margins for a second here. From what you're seeing when you are talking to integration companies, realistically, what is a healthy margin in our industry that integrators could sit there and go, okay, well, this is what I'm making on a project, and this I know I'm going to be relatively safe if I earn. And it's there. Obviously, there's a lot of stuff that comes into play where people just aren't charging enough or aren't getting the margin they expect. So how do they avoid that and work out what that margin should actually be?
Yeah, I get asked that a lot about what the typical margin. And I remember years ago when the executive director of CEDIA sat down and he put together this chart. And the margin should be 35, your overhead should be 25, and your profit should be 10. And he threw that out there, and that's sort of been a standard for the industry, that your job should bring in a 35% margin, 25% should be used to cover overhead, and then 10% should go into your pocket. The only problem with that is that different people look at job costs differently, and depends on the software that you have. I see so many companies. We did a benchmarking study, and I had a company that showed me their financials, and they had an 80% margin. Woo!
Okay.
Spectacular. I looked at it. Why did he have an 80% margin? Because he was only counting, he counted his sales, sell a project for $100,000, and then there was only $20,000 of equipment, and the rest was labor. And he never counted his labor and deducted it to get to the margin because he wasn't counting the labor costs. So the big question is what goes into your margin. I always joke with companies and I say, my goal is to make your jobs as expensive as possible. Because if I can take costs that really belong to jobs, but you don't put them in the cost of goods sold section, if I move those costs up there, your margin will fall, but your net profit will be the same. But now you really know how much it costs to do the work that you do. So that 35% number is sort of an all over the map number, but to beware that to achieve a 35% margin, you need to have a 54% markup on equipment and material. So some people think they get the terms confused, but a 54% markup will produce a 35% margin.
Let's pause for a moment and hear from our partners. Connected Magazine is your go-to publication for the commercial and residential AV and smart home industry. And in this latest edition, there's a story you should really pay attention to. A major speaker manufacturer has announced it's shutting down its dedicated app. It's not the first time we've seen a move away from a proprietary platform, and it certainly won't be the last. But it raises some important questions about long-term system stability, client trust, and what happens when platforms change after handover. Connected unpacks what this shift means for your clients, for their systems, and for you as the integrator. And importantly, what you can do next. You'll find it in the latest edition of Connected and online. The links are in this episode's description. And while we're talking about industry recognition, the 2026 CEDIA Awards are now open. If you've delivered a project you're genuinely proud of, this is your moment. Last year's winners included Denote, Wavetrain Cinemas, Cater, and Luxor Integration, and there's no reason you shouldn't be on that list this year. Flagship categories include Best Integrated Home and Best Home Cinema, alongside specialist awards like Best Assisted Living Project, Best Outdoor Space, and Technology Beyond the Home. The entry process has been streamlined, but still don't leave it too late. Entries close on the 24th of April. Head to cedia.awardsplatform.com to get started. Now, back to the show. And I guess that's one of those things where, I mean, if people who are running the businesses don't necessarily come from a business background, it's very easy to see where they get, I guess, lost in this process. And really it comes down to getting over that ego of asking for help. And I guess you've probably seen that quite a lot. And I imagine, is that a universal concept as well, or is that fundamentally Australian where people don't ask for help?
No, I think people are afraid to ask for help, but at the same time, it depends on how you approach them. So for example, years and years ago at CEDIA Expo, we taught a series of financial management classes, sort of basic and then intermediate and advanced. And a lot of the owners took the advanced class because they didn't want no stinking basic or intermediate or any of that. They knew what they were doing. But the questions they asked in those classes made me realize that they didn't know what they were doing, but they didn't want to admit it. And then we had this benchmarking class where he went over some of the stuff that I went over in the basic class. And at the end of the class, I had business owners that had been in business for a very long time and were very well respected business owners. They're like, oh my God, his class was so great. And I thought, that's because he taught basic numbers to you. So I don't think people should be made ashamed that they don't know the numbers. The other question I ask is, how many integrators started out by, going to school and getting an advanced degree in whatever? Maybe they got in computer science or something like that. And then they thought, oh, I like this integration stuff. So they went out and raised venture capital, and then they did a market research survey, and then they did some focus groups, and then they raised all this money and they started the company. And I'm like, no, that's not how it happens. Somebody either has a boss they think they can do better than, or they just want to try it on their own, and they're the kind of people that don't want to have a boss, and they go out and start the company. But their background isn't in business. I'm not going to ask an integrator to write up a contract. Could you just, rewrite your contract that you have with your clients? No, what's the integrator going to do? Well, first I'm going to go to ChatGPT, but then I'm going to, or Grok or whatever. I'm not promoting one AI over another, but I'm going to go to AI and have it written. But I am going to pay a lawyer to make sure that I'm, cover myself. And the same sort of thing with financials. You can't just know it all. You have to, if your expertise is in the equipment, the installation, how everything works together, i.e. the term integration, then you have to have an expectation that maybe it would be helpful to have somebody else come in and help explain that stuff.
Yeah, exactly right. And I will add there, when you say that they send their contracts to a lawyer to sign off, I would say I hope they do. And I really hope they're just not copying it from someone else's website. And I say that knowing full well that so many of them copy it from someone else's website.
Yeah, and the problem is that, 95% of the time it's fine, but then all of a sudden you end up in, well, you're not as litigious as we are in America. So everybody in America ends up in a lawsuit. So.
Let's talk a little bit about cash flow, because cash flow, I know, it is a killer, especially for even some good businesses. Cash flow will knock them out. So from what you've seen, where do integrators typically go wrong when it comes to cash flow?
Well, I already mentioned a little bit about that with the customer deposits. That money should not be used, robbing Peter to pay Paul. You should not be using customer deposits for future work to pay for previous work. And what happens is if you start getting into a cash flow hole, it's a vortex. And in order to get out of it, you're spinning, you have to finally slow it down. It's really hard to reverse a vortex. So what's important is to understand the cost of money, is to be able to borrow it and use a line of credit if you can, and to be able to forecast out what you're going to pay for. Some companies use, I heard a keynote many years ago by the guy who started Kinko's, which was then sold to FedEx. And he started his company through using credit cards. But not just one credit card, he used two credit cards. So one cut off on the 15th and one cut off on the 31st. So he was always doing that. And I'm fine with that as long as you pay it off. Otherwise, you're paying, 25% interest. So when it comes to cash flow is you want to make sure that you're as much as possible using OPM, other people's money. I'm not going to buy equipment if my customer doesn't give me the money for it first. Where the problem comes in is when it comes to labor, clients quite often won't pay for labor until it's done. So it's kind of, I refer to it as sort of money ahead or money behind. You can always be pretty much money ahead on equipment because I'm not going to buy it until they do it. But you can't always be money ahead on labor because quite often they want to see that work done before they pay for it. So the more you can put together your billing so it's 40, 30, 20, 10 or whatever, the more that you can front load and the more you can ask up front, the better off you are. And to be aware on a job when it turns into a money behind instead of a money ahead. When are you actually, you've used up all their money to buy the equipment and pay for some of the labor. Now is the money coming out of my pocket, and I have to make sure that I deal with that in terms of billing faster, getting a retainer, getting a line of credit that I'm going to pay back immediately. But being aware when that tipping point comes, when you go from being money ahead to money behind. Hopefully it's in the last part of the job.
I've noticed that a lot of integrators, or a lot of tradies in general, really, they over here tend to treat their clients as if they're mates rather than clients. And they can be quite uncomfortable asking for money. How do you get around that mindset and actually make them comfortable in asking for the money that they're entitled to?
Well, it helps if they have somebody else that can do it. The first thing I would say is, get a part-time bookkeeper and make him or her mean. But I think that you have to realize the worth of what you're doing. So asking for money isn't sort of asking for them to loan you something. Instead of thinking about it for asking for money, you're thinking about being paid for the services that you're rendered or that you're rendering. So I'm not just asking you for money. I'm like, hey, do you like your project? Did you enjoy it? It's worth something. That's where I think it's important to pay for what you got. And that's where you need to send me a check for the fabulous project that we put together. And I don't know why I'm so into AI because I use it all day long, is write out a nasty email and go to AI and say, make this nice, make this professional. I do that all the time. I vent to my AI all the time, and then it comes back with some really nice stuff, or tells me don't even say that. But you can certainly, and then it thanks me. I always find it amazing when AI finishes it. You're handling this very well. Okay, I just got a compliment from a computer. I'm supposed to feel good or something. But I find it just very good for ideas. I don't have it write stuff for me, but I have it edit and I say, or I say, what's the best way to handle it? But I think it's really important to not think, you're going out. It's not like you paid for, you bought dinner and you're asking them to reimburse you for dinner. You provided something really spectacular. They wanted you to put this together. They love it. They invite you over to watch a movie or listen to some music. And you're like, that's worth value. So I'm not asking for money. I'm asking for for you to recognize the value of what you got.
Whereas I'm just thinking about how many people listening to this would actually be hoping that I now run my messages through ChatGPT to make them nicer, and I'm just going to have got no chance. You mentioned before when we were talking about cash flow, this idea of getting into this vortex and kind of almost this cycle of once you start to spiral, you can spiral. Are there warning signs that will preempt that vortex that integrators can use to identify before they get there and take some steps to avoid it?
Absolutely. Well, if you have a good set of financials, there's something called the working capital ratio or the quick ratio or current ratio. If I sat down and stuck in a drawer, let's say I don't even have good financials, I'm going to put a pile of my invoices that people owe me money over here. I'm going to put a pile of invoices where I owe money and put it over there and see put it on a scale. The amount of money that people owe me should be much bigger than the amount of money that I owe out. I mean, it's the same thing in my real life. Hopefully the money I bring in is more than the combination of all my bills for the month as in a personal side. So if you're looking toward the future, how much money am I supposed to come up with? Look at those things that you pay monthly, but then look at the projects that you're doing and just try and guess, how much am I going to have to pay for in the next 2 months? And then take a look at the work you're doing and say, how much do you think my clients will give me in the next 2 months? But the one, I think, foolish mistake that people make is they pay for high interest rates when they could pay for things with low interest rates. So here's a quandary. I owe a vendor some money and they're like, I'm going to start charging you interest. Okay, fine. I'm in trouble. I owe them money. And what's the interest rate they charge? 12%, maybe even 18%. So instead I pay them by credit card so they get off my back. But I can't pay the credit card. How much does the credit card charge? 23, 24, 25%. So why am I paying a lower interest debt with a higher interest debt? So one of the problems like the cash flow vortex is don't get behind on your bills, don't get behind on your taxes, because then if I do get money in, that money has to pay the interest on all the money that I borrowed. So if you can try and keep it all current, and so that the money that comes in gets to be used to pay for bills, as opposed to interest on debt that I've racked up, that's where you're going to be able to ultimately reverse that vortex.
So one of the other things that I wanted to talk to you about then, and obviously this all goes hand in hand with each other, especially when we are talking about business principles, but it's the idea of estimating. And I know it's not specific to integrators. Every trade struggles with it. I know the guy who created the electrical labour unit manual for Australia quite well, and he always got so frustrated with people just not wrapping their head around it. So I'm wondering, from your perspective then, why is it so difficult for people to understand the idea of estimating?
So it's so funny. I always, I'm talking to different clients, and first of all, when do they estimate? When do they do their proposals? Let me guess, 7 p.m., Saturdays and Sundays? So it's sort of thought of as like the extra thing. One of the problems, stepping back a little bit, that integrators have is if you're really, really busy and you're the only person that sells, you have your volume does these peaks and valleys, because when you're really busy, you're not selling. Then when you're selling, you're not busy. So once all your job's finished, then there's nothing to fill the pipeline. So you have to decide, I'm going to do estimates every Wednesday morning from 8 to noon. Turn off the phone, set your out of office. There can't be any fire. fireworks fires that I have to put out. And so they have to dedicate time to it, because I think all too often it's always left to be sort of the ugly stepchild of running your business. So that's the first thing, is they have to focus on it. But the second thing is, I think they're missing a great opportunity because they're not learning from their estimating. So when a job goes bad, oh, I don't know, I guess we just whatever. Well, what took longer than you thought? Well, we had too much labor. Okay, well, what took longer? Was it pre-wire? Was it installing the speakers? Was it racking? What was it? So they don't delve in when jobs are done to do what they call a post-mortem, to look and see when it doesn't hit the mark on the estimate. Use that information to figure out next time we should charge more for this, or I should estimate more hours for that, or I should do something to figure out that I don't make those same mistakes. And labor is the biggest problem. The other thing they do when they estimate is they're like, oh yeah, because I used to work in the field, it'll take me about 8 hours. Well, first of all, your employee is not as good as you are. Nobody's as good as you are, I promise you. And so your employee's going to take longer. So you have to overestimate the number of hours. And then they turn and say, but they'll never get the job. Okay. If you can't do the job with half the labor time that you think it's going to take, why do you want to do a job that's going to lose money?
That is a great question. Yep. And have you had any response to that question of why, or are you just met with silence? Like, I met you with silence just then.
No, I met with, you're right. I'm just so afraid of not having work. And that's where I say you've got to step back from that. So if you're struggling and you're losing money, you're keeping busy, unless you have a horrible home life that you're just trying to escape from, it's not going to work in the long run. So you have to look at your business in the short run, but you also have to look at it in the long run. And I've seen too many companies where they have 1 or 2 good years and then they have a stinker and it wipes out everything from those years. I had someone who came to me and he said he was very excited because he's starting to put money in his retirement account. I said, that's great. He was 65 at the time, and I think that's just a little bit late to start thinking about funding your retirement. At least in Australia, it's required. The funding is required.
It is, and that is one very, very fortunate thing that we have here. So to kind of tie some of these concepts together, when we're talking about cash flow, we're talking about estimating. The common practice for an integrator is to do a fixed price project with scope creep in mind, with blowouts, with everything in mind. Is that still a viable business model?
It is if you know what you're doing and you have a crew that you know what they can do. One company I worked with used to do equipment, fixed price equipment, and do time and material for labor, with a not to exceed, with a percentage. And you have to have some sort of percentage. But the question is, if you're going to ship the risk and you don't want me to charge a bunch of overhead and profit. Actually, I had one company that would produce a fixed price and say, if you would like me to cut the price by 10%, we can do it time and equipment. But if it goes back up, that's your risk. So the question is, who's going to accept the risk? Fixed price jobs are still there as long as you spend the time to figure out if they made money or lost money and why. And not everything is a one-off. There's a pattern. You just have to find that pattern. But there's nothing wrong with seeing if people will accept the fixed price. I mean, a time and equipment or time and material job. And in where I live part-time in California, it's against the law to do T&M or time and material jobs unless you have a price not to exceed. But the interesting thing is, I happen to like T&M with a price not to exceed, particularly because sometimes when you do a T&M job, people are like, well, it just means that the client will pay for everything. And at some point in time, they do until they don't. And then they get mad. And then you lost a client and the job went south. If you do T&M not to exceed, how do you fix that exceed number? How do you make it get bigger? Well, if there's scope creep, if you do a change order, that increases that not to exceed limit. So all of a sudden, people are all intently aware, just aware of what that not to exceed number is. And when things take longer than they should halfway through the job, instead of waiting till the end of the job, you're like, okay, we had found dry rot when we were, cutting up the walls, and now we have to move stuff around, or the heating registers weren't where we thought they were, or whatever happens, whether it's the client making a suggestion because they just read they just saw on the news the best thing that now they should install, or whether it's unforeseen circumstances. It makes integrators look more to looking at that scope of work document and keeping in line with the scope of work. Because that, I think, is also where a lot of times jobs lose money. It gets out of control. And then by the time you've already spent all this extra stuff, now you can't bill for it because they never approved it in the first place, but you sort of went down a rabbit hole and lost money. So I think time and expense jobs work. If you do a not to exceed, it makes the customer happy that you're not just going to gouge them for everything, but it also makes you very much aware what that exceed number is and what the scope of work is, and document any difference to that scope of work.
So I guess a lot of what we're talking about would involve the business owner or business manager to, as you say, take a step back and really not necessarily be so hands-on as a technician. How do you get someone who is very technically minded, who is very, very good at what they do, who just might not want to work for someone else, to actually take that step back and to sit down and realize, okay, well, this is what I need to do to make these decisions about my business, and I shouldn't be so hands-on?
That's really hard. I was actually at a client's office yesterday, and I heard an interaction where somebody came running in and asked me a question, and I said, and he answered it very quickly and left, and the employee left. I said, you shouldn't have answered that question. And he's like, why? I said, because you're training your employees now, whenever there's a question, to come to you and disturb you and get you to answer it. And they're not learning from that. So I think it's important to decide, the old management book about working on the business instead of in the business. But decide what you can learn how to delegate, and then spend some time learning how to delegate and start delegating and start following up after it's delegated. The worst thing that a small owner can do is when something goes wrong, say, I should have done it myself. If you say that, and we all do, I do too, but if you say that, you should say, no, I should have delegated it better. I should have explained more. I should have tracked the progress. I should have checked in with whoever I delegated it to. So when that pops into your head, I should have done it myself, step back and say, no, if I want to do it myself, I'll fire everybody and go back to just working in the field all by myself. And if you like that, do it. But if not, and you want to build a bigger company, then you have to be aware when that thought creeps into your head that that's a great opportunity to figure out what should you be doing differently. And then the other thing is, some people, do you want to get rich or do you want to have a lifestyle business? And there's different ways of running businesses. But if you want a business where I'm my own boss, so nobody's going to yell at me except all my clients, but I want to be my own boss. I want to be able to take time in the afternoon to go coach a football team, or to hang out with my kids, or to do something like that. And if I can have a business that brings in enough money to give me the lifestyle that I want so that I have a good work-life balance, there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing, if there's a voice in the back of your head that says, you need to be a bigger company and you need to hire a whole bunch of employees, maybe not. I've gone through ups and downs. I had a business where I started with one employee and then I had 5. And this was back in the day when you would go to the bank to deposit money. And I was going to the bank and just depositing all sorts of money. And I was like, oh, I'm making so much money. I wasn't making hardly any money. I wasn't looking at the bottom line. I was letting the top line just sort of make me think I was getting rich. So decide what you want. Do you want to run an official company and try and grow profitably, or do you want a lifestyle business? Because there's nothing wrong with a lifestyle business.
So I guess, like we said at the very start of this conversation, you've been in the industry for a while. I've been in the industry for a little while. From what you've seen, what separates those companies, and they might still be very small companies that have been around for 20-something years, to the ones that are, a flash in the pan and they shut down. Well, they start up, make a lot of noise, and then they shut down after maybe 2 or 3 years.
What's the difference between that and...
Yeah, how have they structured differently, or what have they done differently? Is there universal concepts that all of these companies that have had longevity have kind of stuck to, that have been successful, and you can actually demonstrate that?
Yes, I think what they've done, the companies that have been around a long time, I'll use one integrator as an example. They wanted to grow, and they decided they would spend money, and it cost money. They got in debt, but they built the infrastructure so that when they grew profitably. The companies that are the flash in the pan outgrow themselves too quickly. They do one project that's spectacular, so they should be able to do 2 with the same amount of people in the same day, 24 hours in a day. So it's the companies that grow too rapidly and don't have the infrastructure, those are the ones that collapse. And that's what I see happen. Because yes, if I did 4 projects and I made this much money, if I do 8 projects, you think you should make twice as much, and you actually make half as much, because you don't manage 8 projects in the same way that you managed 4.
So that very much sounds like they need to have very strict boundaries in place then of jobs they'll accept, what hours they'll work, and that type of thing. So how important is that for longevity from what you've seen?
Oh, I think it's very important. I think having a boundary is important. I think that if, there's nothing, first of all, if that's happening and you're really, really busy, what should you do? Raise your rates, charge more. So if I'm doing the 4 jobs and all of a sudden now 8 come, double your price. I mean, astronomically increase your rate and see who comes and see who stays and who goes. So it's really important that they keep an eye on the ball, on the numbers, on the projects, and just don't let it get out of control. It's the companies that grow too fast and everything gets out of control where they end up in trouble. So yes, good boundaries. And I will tell you, as I've gotten older and my children are all grown and now I have grandchildren, I still regret evenings and weekends that I worked when I shouldn't have, and I should have been hanging out with my kids. And it's really hard. I get that, but having good boundaries is really the only way to go.
I probably shouldn't say this on the podcast, but I'm interested in your opinion on this, because I have 2 rates that I use as a freelancer. I have the market rate, and I have the screw you, I don't want this job, but I'll take your money if you really want to pay me this rate. And every so often those jobs come through and you think, oh, I still don't want to do the job, but the money is great. Is that good business?
Yes, absolutely.
Excellent.
So when I first started out consulting, people would ask me how much I charged. And at the time I had a little black book, and if it was pretty empty, I'd charge the same rate. If it was pretty full, I'd jack up my rate and see. It doesn't hurt to test it out. And what would be interesting is you have those 2 rates is increase slowly the rate for the work that you do want. And it never hurts. If you increase your rate and everybody says no, you can turn on a dime fast enough to be able to get jobs. I don't say you should go back and say, oh, yeah, I'll do it for less. I find if you negotiate with somebody and they say to you things like, well, can you just charge less overhead? How do I charge? Sure, let me use your truck. Let me use your Mercedes as our company vehicle. No, I can't charge less overhead. I always say, if you want to be a nonprofit, then go ahead and be a nonprofit. But if somebody says, can you lower the rate? Can you lower what you're charging? My response is absolutely. Let's go take a look at the scope of work document and see what part of it you don't want to do. Because we can negotiate all of that. And then if you're very close to it, you can certainly take something out and take out a few more dollars than what that cost. You can play that game. But yes, I think, and what's interesting, Paul, that you say that is that you've got this, I don't really want the job, and they come along and they take it. What does that mean? In some way, it also means that you're worth it.
Yeah. And I will add a quick disclaimer here for everyone listening. If I do or have ever freelanced for you, trust me, you got the nice rate. So let's start to kind of tie this all up and into one nice little bow. If there was an integrator who was listening to this, who feels busy but broke, what advice would you give them?
Busy but broke, raise your rates. Increase what you're charging. Now, you may not want to increase your equipment markup if you don't want to, but increase your worth, increase your labor. I had a conference many years ago I went to, and this guy said to me, "Oh, I'm so busy, I don't know what to do." And I said, "What are you charging?" And it was something ridiculous, like $25 an hour or something. I said, "Why are you charging less than anybody else? Maybe that's why you're so busy, and maybe you need to raise your rate." So if you're broke and you don't know where you're going to get the next dollar to finish that job, start looking at your new work and raise your rates. But the second part, I always said the 3 ways to increase profits: charge more, spend less, and do more work. When I say charge more, the other thing that I spend a lot of time focusing on is charging for the actual work that you do, is charging for every change order or tracking change orders. When something changes in the scope of work document, you want to charge for that. And what you need to include on every sort of change order is project management time. So if I come to you and I'm like, "Oh my gosh, I saw a review from CES and there's this fabulous new whatever. Let's say it's a new projector. I want that projector. Can you do that?" Well, you haven't bought the projector yet. Sure, you could probably do that. But what's it going to take for you to figure out how much it costs? What's the installation? How is it different? What do I need to know? It's not like I can just swap out this color for that color. It takes time and expertise and money. And so every time there's particularly a client requested change order, it's not just the difference in the price of equipment that they decided on. There's more to that. Maybe you already ordered it. Maybe you have to return it and pay a restocking fee. Or, maybe you've already done a bunch of research on one piece of equipment and now they want a different one. So every change order needs to have a whole bunch of stuff in it for management time to manage that change to the original scope of work. So if you're broke and you're busy, take a look at the projects you're doing and keep doing them at the low rate that you're doing. Don't immediately go and say, "Oh, we're changing all our prices." But take a look. How much more are you doing that you didn't sign up for in the first place? What sort of changes did they initiate? What sort of other subcontract or unforeseen circumstances did you find on the job? And are you charging enough for that? Because I think a lot of integrators have a good enough price if everything went smoothly and nothing ever changed. But as things start to change, they start to lose money. And that's because they're not really accounting for all of the costs to make a change to the scope of work. One other thing is, here's my joke of the day. Imagine how profitable every integrator could be if they only had to do the first 85% of the job. Right? Where do jobs lose money? They lose money at the end. I always love an owner who's like, "Oh, yeah, we just need to go back and do a couple of things." And $5,000 later, a couple of things wasn't just a couple of things. So, yeah, focus on the job in the beginning, but focus on the job in the end. So it has an official end. You're done. Now we're going to stop coming back and doing callbacks or warranty. We're switching over to maintenance. There's a fine line between maintenance and warranty. So pay attention to that last 10 to 15% of the job and make sure that not all of your profit is wiped out in that last portion of the job.
And I would say that people listening to this, especially if they haven't listened to previous episodes, what you've just said there ties in perfectly with my conversation with Richard Mullins about technical debt. So if you haven't listened to that episode yet, go straight to that one after this and you'll see how it all kind of ties together.
Great minds think alike, right?
So what about advice then for someone who's just starting a business for the first time, never done it before? Is there one or two things that you think they need to get right from the very beginning to avoid them heartache in the future?
That's a great question. I love it. Yes, look at the top and the bottom line. So when you sell something, don't just get excited when all of a sudden a big chunk of money shows up in your bank account. Look and see, what am I going to use that money for? Set aside money for equipment that you haven't bought yet. Set aside money that should be going to taxes if you're not doing that. Make sure, I've seen way too many integrators start out, and I always say in the United States, the first year is always profitable because there's no insurance and no taxes, which isn't the case, but they often don't pay for that. So be aware that it's not just all when a customer pays you, that's how much you're making. That's the top line number, and be aware of the bottom line number. So look at your profit and set up a system to not only track the money in and the money out successfully, but also track where you are on a project. What did you think it would cost, and what did it cost, or what does it cost as of this point in time? So if you can focus on the numbers, I think that's really the most important place to start, is making sure you have something behind you that backs up your gut feeling.
Thank you to Leslie for sharing so openly. If there's one message to take from this episode, it's that being busy is not the same as being healthy. Profit doesn't happen by accident. Cash flow doesn't fix itself. And growth without discipline is one of the fastest ways to lose a business. Leslie's advice isn't about chasing scale for the sake of it. It's about understanding your numbers well enough to build the kind of business you actually want to run. Thank you again to the partners who support this podcast and the industry: ADI Global, Amber Technology, Colosseum, Connected Magazine, and CEDIA. Be sure to support the companies that support you. If you'd like to get in touch, please do so. Email me at info@masterintegrator.com.au or find me on LinkedIn. Thank you for listening to the show. I'm Paul Skelton. I'll see you next time. Hi folks, Paul here, just with a quick update. The response so far to the podcast has been overwhelming, and as a result, Master Integrator is growing. So now we're inviting the global community to help shape what comes next. What began in Australia is evolving into a shared editorial podcast platform, built around real voices from real markets. As a result, we're now looking for volunteer co-hosts outside of Australia, including those based in Asia, Africa, Latin America, the Middle East, Southeast Asia, Europe, and Canada. Wherever the smart home technology industry is growing and needs a platform to tell its stories. Now, this isn't necessarily about building a personal profile. It's about representing your local community, sharing practical, lived experience, and helping connect integrators across borders. If you care about the future of this industry and want to contribute, I'd love to hear from you. Email me at info@masterintegrator.com.au. Thanks again for your support.